What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. So this video is sort of a follow-up on last week's where I talked about whether or not Christians should play video games and that kind of stuff, and essentially established that, at least from my perspective, it's okay to play video games. But of course I'm going to say that. I'm that random Christian gamer. But, you know, I think we kind of set the groundwork, at least for why video games should not be differentiated from other forms of media when considering, you know, are they okay for Christians? So, with that in mind, I wanted to get into a little more detail on what games might sort of be okay to play or not. And ultimately, I'm probably a little more on the liberal side, so to speak, when it comes to this. I mean, you can look at my channel and see that I've played, like, the Borderlands games, or Darksiders, some M-rated games, some of which I've just reviewed, others that I've actually played through on my channel. And ultimately, you know, certainly some of this depends on, you know, age range and things like that. When it comes to that, I would say general rule of thumb is, you know, stick with the ESRB rating for whether or not, you know, you think it's okay for a certain member of your family or something like that. But as far as, you know, us adults go, I would hesitate to put much of any restrictions on, you know, particular kinds of games to play. Now, there are some that are, you know, they go kind of over the top on a certain aspect of things. Like, there are some that are super duper bloody, gory, or some that are, you know, really sexually charged in nature. I mean, heck, there's a Playboy video game, to the best of my knowledge. It's a bit on the older side of things now, but still, it exists. You maybe don't engage in that, but ultimately, like, where do you draw the line on what is or is not okay to play? Some people think, you know, oh, violent video games as a whole shouldn't be, that Christians shouldn't play those because they're encouraging further violence. First off, I would say that there are studies to argue against that point, that video games cause violence at all. But what kind of violent are we talking about here? Like, where do you draw your level, or where do you draw your line when it comes to what is and is not too violent of a video game? Because I can almost guarantee you that, like, the vast majority of people who are talking about, you know, violent video games are not thinking about all video games that have any semblance of violence in them. It's really more of a sliding scale than a, you know, cut and dry, this is violent, this is not. So, you take a game that is completely non-violent, like, let's say Candy Crush. It's just matching the candies to, you know, earn points or to, you know, unblock certain other spaces on the board, different things like that. I mean, there's no person or character is coming to any harm because of any of this. It's Candy Crush. Come on. So, the thing is, you take a very similar type of game, like, let's say a Puzzle Quest. Well, now you've introduced a boss character or some enemy that your matching of the tile brick things is now dealing damage to this enemy. Does that make the video game violent? You're hurting a character. Okay, let's take it even another slight step further. You take a game that I'm actually playing quite a lot. Gems of War, it's called. First of all, it literally has war in the title. Second, similarly to Puzzle Quest, you're dealing damage to enemy troops. And in some cases, you're actually, using the energy that you collect from your, gem matches to charge your abilities that deal damage to the enemy troops. It's not just a passive, flashy way of showing the matches and what they do. It's active engagement in saying, okay, I am activating this ability that is dealing damage to these other characters. Does that make the game violent? So I think you can kind of see what I'm getting at in terms of this progression and the scale of violence. And it's like that with other aspects that could be deemed questionable too. So like, sexuality or something of that sort. Drug use isn't necessarily quite so, but I mean, you have some games where it's just, oh, there happens to be a character who's smoking a cigarette, all the way up to, okay, you have your character who you are deliberately taking actions to have them, smoke weed or do something else of that sort. Where do you draw the line on that? So there's all these various complicating factors that really are on a sliding scale, if anything. And so it's hard to come up with like a hard and fast rule, especially for us adults, on where do you draw the line. Now, for younger age groups, again, might want to try, at the very least, sticking with ESRB ratings and or looking at why they're rated as such, and maybe, like, maybe even avoid some of the teen-rated games that could have, more sexuality in them than you want, or different things like that. What I'm ultimately getting at here is it's kind of up to you. Let me actually turn to some Bible verses that might help illustrate the point a little bit. Because essentially I think it boils down to, what is your level of tolerance for these things? At what point does it become a problem for you? Like, at what point does it start having a negative effect on you, whether it be, bringing up some sort of trauma or putting you in a bad mood or whatever? Like, again, it kind of is different for everybody in that regard. So bringing in some Bible verses to kind of shed some light on this. I'm going to be reading from Romans chapter 14, focusing mostly on the last few verses. Now, context for this is they're talking more specifically about eating things. Flashback to the vegan discussion that I had in the previous video. This isn't quite that, but there's some debate within the early church of whether or not, believers in Christ should abstain from certain foods. More specifically, whether the Gentile believers, meaning not Jewish and not already practicing these things, should actually adopt the Jewish practice of avoiding certain foods. And, a lot of it boils down to essentially not being critical of newer believers or, basically not causing undue trouble, essentially, for fellow believers. So with that as kind of the backdrop, I'm going to just read verses 20 through 23, just to give it some verse context in what I'm reading as well. So, it says, "Don't tear apart the work of God over what you eat. Remember, all foods are acceptable, but it is wrong to eat something if it makes another person stumble. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble. You may believe there's nothing wrong with what you are doing, but keep it between yourself and God. Blessed are those who don't feel guilty for doing something they have decided is right. But if you have doubts about whether or not you should eat something, you are sinning if you go ahead and do it. For you are not following your convictions. If you do anything you believe is not right, you are sinning." And there's a footnote regarding the word stumble there. Some manuscripts read "be offended" or "weakened." But essentially, the idea is you shouldn't do and you can replace eating here with playing video games, or with listening to certain music or whatever. But the general idea still applies. You don't want to do something that's going to cause problems for another believer. You don't want to drink wine or other alcoholic beverages in front of a former alcoholic who's, recovering and trying to abstain from those things in order to, get themselves in a better place, mentally and or physically. Similarly, don't play a really bloody, gory video game in front of somebody who's squeamish about that kind of stuff. Also, maybe don't play a Call of Duty or something of that sort in front of a former soldier who's struggling with, war-based PTSD. Or, if someone struggles with lust, don't play an overly sexualized video game. The list goes on, but I think you get my point. But it's not just, the concept doesn't just apply for you, or for other people around you, and you not engaging in those things because of other people. You also shouldn't do it if it causes your own personal problems. Like if you find yourself, listening to a certain song and it always gets you angry, or if you play a particular video game that, has a scantily clad character in it, and you find yourself, lustful because of that, maybe don't play that game. And in terms of knowing what games to avoid and things like that, I think that sort of just comes with experience and or, maybe some asking other people, what they know about it. But there's also nothing wrong with stopping a game partway through. And, you notice a scene that you have some sort of problem with one way or another, and realizing that there could very well be more of this if you continue. If you have a problem with that, then stop playing the game. Not every video game has to be completed 100%. You don't even have to complete the main storyline in every single game. If you have a problem with it, don't play the game. And yes, I realize you might have paid money for it or whatever, so you might have some motivation to play the game there. But ultimately, if it's going to cause problems for you, And especially if it's going to, you know, in some way cause you to then engage in some sort of sinful action or attitude, then it's not worth continuing to play. So, again, kind of, as best as I can establish a general rule of thumb for things, I think that's really the best way that I can sum it up. So, again, if you wanted the Bible reference there, that's Romans 14, and I specifically read from verses 20 through 23. It's basically the last little section of the chapter. And I think that can kind of serve as a decent guide, not only with video games, but with a lot of things. So, anyway, that about wraps up my thoughts regarding, you know, video games and whether or not Christians, A, should play them, and B, you know, maybe which ones might be more okay, so to speak, than others. And ultimately, the too long didn't watch version is, yeah, generally video games are okay to play, but you got to realize, you know, what might be problematic for you and avoid those in particular. Anyway, okay, that's all I've got for now. So, as always, please like the video if you enjoyed it and want to see more videos of this type. Share the video as well with other people if you want them to see it and maybe, you know, get some perspective on this whole topic idea thing. And if you want to see more videos from me, of course, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to get updates when I post new ones. Look down in the description as well for info on other social media pages and how to find and follow those. And leave comments down below with any thoughts that you have regarding this particular topic, other topics you might want me to cover, or any other video ideas in general. Whatever you have for me, let me know down below. So that's it. I hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I will see you for another video here in the near future. But until next time, stay cool, people.